Hi, everybody. How are you? Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for Cyber Insurance 101. I'm Rhonda Hebert. I'm the Director of Channel Marketing here at DataStream Insurance. Today, we're going to go over the basics for you, right? Cyber Insurance 101. It is exactly what we are saying it is. So we'll talk about what's required for cyber insurance, what you should look for in a policy or a quote, and actually, my favorite part is what is your best defense strategy when it comes to a breach, right? We're going to round out today's session with Q&A, but please feel free to add Q&A throughout the chat, throughout the whole session. You can do it in the chat. The goal is to get you out of here in 45 minutes. If you have questions and you want to engage longer, we're happy to stay on. I just wanted to let you know that we value your time and we'll give you as much back as we can. So in and out with 45 minutes. All right, so without further ado, I want to introduce my esteemed colleague, Joe Randall. He's our Director of Operations for here at DataStream Insurance. Joe?
Fantastic. Thanks, Rhonda. Really excited to be here today. One of my favorite things is to do just this, go through Cyber Insurance 101 and help get some awareness into the marketplace. I know that not everyone's favorite thing is to talk about insurance as it is mine often. So thank you so much for being here and taking a little bit of time out of your day to be here. And as Rhonda said, if you do have a question, please post it in the chat. Would love to address any specific things that are top of mind for you. And of course, we'll save time at the end as well. But without any further ado, we'll dive into some Cyber Insurance 101. So who needs cyber insurance? I mean, it's kind of interesting. This is a topic that I think if we asked this question maybe 18 months ago, right, it was kind of almost a new type of insurance and just sort of burgeoning in the industry and not as much awareness. But with all the events going on throughout the world and anyone who is, keeping an eye on a news stream or on the newspaper, definitely you can see the need for cyber insurance with the different types of threats that are out there, both geopolitically and locally. So typically, in where cyber insurance really stemmed from was from the possession of sensitive data. So anyone who has large amounts of what we call PII, those are social security numbers, credit cards, sensitive information, is definitely a candidate for looking into cyber insurance. It's kind of evolved a little bit over, as I said, the last 12 to 18 months to where now there's more sophisticated attacks and there's really more of a widespread need for cyber insurance protection throughout the marketplace. Previously, it was mainly in those areas, maybe healthcare, manufacturing, or supply chain. But now, due to advances, unfortunately, in criminal technology, things such as ransomware as a service that are so widespread, it's really anyone who is a candidate for cyber insurance. And in fact, we joke, one of our favorite IT consultant companies says that if you don't have a cyber insurance policy, it's kind of like driving down the highway without a seatbelt on. So it's definitely something to take a good look at. And over the next 26 minutes, my goal is to give you an overview of what that looks like. So when we think about an insurance policy, what's the real point, right? I mean, why would you get insurance, whether, any type of insurance? But here, talking about cyber insurance, what is the point at the end of the day? The real point of cyber insurance is that if there ever is an incident down the road, that you are protected. Not just protected in one area, but comprehensive coverage across the board. And more than that, that you have a real advocate on your side. We work very closely with IT consultant companies to be that person on your side, and we offer a wide range of support, not just when you bind a policy, when you first get it or when you need to use it, but throughout the year. We have a lot of participatory events that raise awareness. Now I'm going to open up a few of these at once so I can talk through them, but this is starting to look at the different areas of coverage. But as I said, what are we really doing here? What's the real point? It's to make sure that you're protected, you have someone to talk to if something happens. So all of our coverage, it really comes down to an incident response plan. That's something that we help you free of charge to develop, working hand in hand with your ITC company. We have tabletop exercises throughout the year, which are sort of like fire drills to simulate what an incident would look like and feel like, because it really is like nothing else. If you walk into your office one day and all the computer screens are that dreaded blue or black color, we call that bricking of computers. And that's an indication that it's going to be a tough couple of days. So when there is an incident, whether it is from a ransomware type attack, whether it is from a data breach, or whether it is from what we call broadly cyber crime, the most important thing is that you're going to have someone to talk to. We have a personalized 24/7 hotline that goes to the top breach coach law firm in the country. We work very closely with Mullen Coughlin, and they have over 90 lawyers on staff that all they do day in, day out is incident response. It's kind of a little bit eye-opening or maybe mind-boggling to think that they could have that many lawyers that all they do is respond to cyber incidents. But if anything, they're so busy that they're adding people all the time, because these cyber attacks are, unfortunately, as I mentioned in the beginning, not just targeted to specific industries anymore. They're broad across the marketplace, just looking for deficiencies. So that first moment when a cyber attack happens, there's that phone call to a breach coach. And the breach coach is going to coordinate all of these things on the screen. These are all facets of a standalone cyber policy, but you have that quarterback of the situation. In addition to help from your ITC, to help from us who are there in any time of need, the first call goes to your breach coach. You immediately go under attorney-client privilege, and they have team members who handle all of these things. There's a forensic investigator to figure out exactly what happened. I mean, what information was exposed? And if it was sensitive data and we need to notify people, they have a call center that can be up and running to notify people. Is there a press release that needs to go out? They have that public relations department. And if it is that situation where someone is posting a message on your screen that says, send me 10 Bitcoin, or I guess if you follow the Bitcoin market, it's probably gonna be more like 20 or 30 Bitcoin now because it went down a little bit. So say your computer screen says, send me 30 Bitcoin, or you're not gonna get your data back. Well, they're gonna have a ransomware negotiator, first of all. And if you're working, as I sure hope you are, with an IT consultant who's helping you to get very, very regular and solid backups, you may have a lot of room for negotiation in an incident. But if a ransom does need to go out to recover data and get systems operable again, they'll coordinate that for you. There'll also be, of course, a remediation and restitution process. There will be handling of loss of income. We call that business interruption. So imagine that there's an incident and you're going through it, and unfortunately, they usually don't last for just an afternoon or 2 or 3 days. Most often it's 2 or 3 weeks, or even 2 or 3 months, unfortunately, in some situations, and there can be significant loss of income. A standalone cyber policy will have business interruption coverage for you. That next circle to the left of loss of income, that's for third-party claims. And this is something that we always highlight in our policy reviews. We love to review people's current policies. And when we go out to the marketplace, as I'll talk about later, we have over 20 specialized sources for cyber policies. And we like to compare them apples to apples. We're in a great position where we can be that advocate for people, where we can truly compare policy A to policy B to policy C, and it doesn't affect us which policy people choose. So we're in a really good position there to just give advice about what's going to be the best for you in your situation. And third-party claims, which are covered by contingent or dependent business interruption, are very important. So business interruption would cover any loss of income that your company faces. But what about those people that are dependent on you, whether it's filling an invoice, delivering a shipment, or other things that you had coming up that you weren't able to do, or if someone else's information was accessed through your system and they experienced a data breach themselves, that can all be covered by third-party claims, or what we call dependent or contingent business interruption. So one of the things we always look for in that situation. I know I'm throwing a lot of things out there, and it can be a little bit overwhelming, honestly, at times, if you start to think about all the different scenarios, which is why I want to start this slide and really all of our conversations and consultations that we do day in, day out, by letting people know that the most important thing is there's someone there to coordinate this process for you, and you're in great hands. So what are the requirements for cyber insurance? When I first got into this industry, it was a little bit, I guess I'd say eye-opening for me, because I expected it to be similar to auto insurance, right? Everyone's familiar with the process of getting auto insurance. I could go online right now, fill in a couple questions on a website or a couple different websites, and just quotes are coming instantly, and you can have auto insurance in minutes, right? Well, cyber insurance, unfortunately, is not quite like that. It's a little bit more like life insurance. Now, life insurance is a little bit of a different process. It's not as much of a commodity, commoditized insurance, because not everyone is eligible. There may be a 30-year-old person in great physical shape, and they have a healthy history, and they could get life insurance very easily. There may be, on the same, or I guess the other side of the coin, there could be a 65-year-old person that's been smoking for 40 years and not in great health and has a history of maybe some health issues, and they might not be eligible at all for life insurance. And then you've got that middle person where maybe they just need to make a few changes to their habits, to their lifestyle, and then they'd be able to work with someone to get a life insurance policy. And that's really more analogous to cyber insurance. And it's why we really focus on our core strategy, which is partnering with IT consultant companies who are already there reinforcing these basic security measures that can really, I can't stress enough how helpful these are to prevent any issues from happening. But when we look at a policy, a lot of times they're the minimum requirement to even get a cyber insurance policy, or it definitely can help to make the premium of a policy a lot lower. So the first is multi-factor authentication. This is MFA, or sometimes you'll see 2FA. I think most people are familiar with this, and this goes really a long way to help every area of cyber incidents, but in particular, well, it's interesting, the thing that we all see in the news, right? It's a ransomware attack. You hear about these very dramatic situations, whether it's a nation state attacking another nation state, or a supply chain, or a business being affected. What we don't hear about a lot are what we call cyber crime. And cyber crime is a broad term that really means financial fraud, whether it's wire transfer fraud, whether it's push payment fraud, or mail fraud. And this happens through phishing with a PH, right? And I think we're all on a personal level inundated with this. Unfortunately, now you might be getting text messages to your phone sometimes, and it's someone pretending to be someone and you find out it's a fraudulent message. And on the business end, they happen primarily through email. It's someone's able to get into the company's email. They can then do a variety of things, but most commonly, they'll maybe replicate an invoice, or they'll change an existing invoice. They'll change the banking numbers and the routing numbers on a wire transfer payment. And unfortunately, a lot of times they're sophisticated enough they can target new employees. And it looks like an email is coming from their boss that says, hey, send this payment over here. And if there aren't proper controls in place, then sometimes they just send out that payment. And this is honestly the most common thing that we see. It's not something that hits the news feed or the newspaper, but it's the most common type of cyber attack that we see day in, day out. So having something so simple as multi-factor authentication on email, on remote access, it's so simple to do, but it actually is very, very effective in blocking the source of these attacks so no one can get into the system. And then training throughout the year that even our staff goes through of just how to recognize a phishing attack. What process is there? If something looks a little funny, who should you notify? Who should you ask about it? So MFA combined with training can really go a long way to preventing a lot of cyber incidents. On a policy, it's typically for most of the insurance carriers, it's a hard requirement. There's a few currently that it's not a hard yes, no for issuing a policy. Might raise the premium a little bit, but there are still a few carriers who will issue policies to companies that do not have MFA as a part of their process. But from everything we hear and keeping our ears to the ground and trying to see what's coming over the next 2 quarters of this year and in 2023, it's most likely sooner than later going to be a requirement for all cyber insurance carriers to have multi-factor authentication. The second requirement and just good practice overall, right, is something that I mentioned a couple slides ago, but it's having really solid backups. So this means a process to, on a weekly or even daily basis, back up your system, your information, but to have it in a place that is either in the cloud, right, so with a third party, or offsite, so it's not accessible through your main system. Again, this sounds a little bit, maybe it could sound pretty obvious, but I gotta say it's something I see a lot, that people might have backups, but they're still accessible through their system. So even though that process is in place, it's not the way that the insurance companies want to see it. But more than anything, it's not the best for you. It's not the best for your protection. So working with your ITC to make sure you have backups that are readily available is something that is just a great practice, but again, something that's a basic requirement for an insurance policy. And they want to know that those backups are accessible, because that way you can be in a great position that if criminals are trying to extort you, because that's ransomware in a policy is called cyber extortion, you can be in a great situation to negotiate, or maybe not even have to pay a ransom, and to be able to be up and running with your backups. A policy would, of course, in that situation still, if you need new hardware, right? If you have good bricking coverage, we'll be able to replace any hardware that needs to be replaced in that process. The third component is more of an emerging field, right? It's endpoint detection and response. So this is something that's going to be monitoring points of access into your system, and is, again, just such a good practice to have, something that will alert you and put you in a great position to be protected, but also self-sufficient, to have eyes on all sides of your network and your system. So that endpoint detection and response is sort of that layer one. And in most of the insurance applications, they ask if there is an EDR solution in place. An MDR, or a managed detection and response, or an XDR, or a crossover, are sort of those second and third generations there that are definitely good to look into. So a minimum of an EDR, and then, linking arms with your ITC, your IT consultant who knows your system, who knows your priorities and how best to protect you. They can point you in the right direction there in terms of, is an EDR enough, or do we want to look for an MDR or an XDR to be that perfect solution for you? So these are the basic requirements. And again, I mentioned that there are some carriers that will still offer policies without MFA, but I think the writing's on the wall that not for long. Backup's so important. That is a requirement, and just a good practice. And then depending on the industry, size of the business, the EDR, MDR, XDR solution can be a requirement, but it's not a hard requirement for most carriers, but just a great practice to have. I mean, ultimately, the reason we're so passionate about this is we want you to never have an incident. Of course, if it's there, if the incident happens, we're there. Your incident response plan is there. your breach coach is there, your ITC is there to guide you through it. But we want to prevent crime. We want to stop cyber criminals from multiplying, which is what's happening right now. And with these basic layers of defense, you can be in a really good position, and the industry as a whole can be in a good position, that we can start to chip away at cybercrime and be in a much better place. So what is your best defense strategy? This is what Rhonda mentioned at the beginning, and we have a 5-pillar approach here. But again, this is an area where you want to make sure you're linking arms closely with someone who's there as a true consultant to you. We are there to help, but an IT consultant is pivotal as a part of your team. And even if you have an internal IT department, it's great to have that third-party eye on things who can really guide you in putting together a comprehensive strategy. So the first component is it's of course what we do. It's an individualized, standalone cyber insurance policy. What standalone means is it's physically a separate policy. Now, every business is going to have what's called a commercial general liability policy, and it is possible to add on an endorsement or a rider to that policy, which will cover quote unquote cyber, is usually all it says. It's certainly better than nothing, but it doesn't cover all the things I've been talking about. It typically only covers data breaches up to $100,000. Whereas when we look at a standalone cyber insurance policy, the minimum we feel comfortable recommending is a $1 million comprehensive policy that will cover all of those areas I've been touching on and more, because this is, cyber insurance 101. There are nuances to these policies, and you want to make sure it's a standalone policy. Everything is clearly written out. It's understood by all parties in the decision-making chain, but most importantly, it has ample coverage. So we really start at that level and go up from there to make sure that we feel really comfortable that all sides of an incident would be covered. Now, consistent monitoring of your cyber posture is something that to have an internal process for, fantastic. But again, another area where it's so important to have a true partnership with an ITC, someone who's there, that what they do, similar to us, day in, day out, they're thinking security. They're thinking about how to best protect you and monitor your posture now, but also to monitor what's coming in the third and fourth quarter of this year and 2023, 2025, 2030. What do we need to prepare for? How do we put ourselves in the best position to be really taken care of for the future and to not have to make any major changes because we're incrementally improving? So we want to always have an eye on that current posture. And then we want to have an incident response and disaster recovery plan. So I talked a little bit about this before. It's actually a pretty simple document, right? What I recommend is physically printing out a page, and we have templates for that. It's always kind of amusing, I think, when the cyber and tech people tell you that the most important thing you can do is to, print out a piece of paper and keep it off your computer. But that's what you really should do. Have an incident response plan. I print it out and put it in a file folder and put it in a desk drawer, somewhere that is not digitally connected. Because again, if you walk into the office one day and none of the computers turn on, if all of your contact information and all of your plans are on your laptop, well, you're not going to be able to access them. So to have that simple incident response plan that is a hard copy. Another easy way to do that is, of course, with a thumb drive, and then to have a separate device, whether it's a backup laptop or a personal laptop that you can access if any of your systems were compromised. So simple plan, and again, we do throughout the year tabletop exercises, which are going through these incident response plans, but it's like a fire drill for a cyber event. So it's like an exercise that's very, very helpful to get multiple people involved in to simulate what would happen in the case of an incident. Enforced policies and procedures. This is handy in so many areas, but in particular, and it's just such an interesting labor market right now, right? Everyone's adding new employees all the time. And cyber criminals, unfortunately, are sophisticated, and they have not just as a service products that are going out there and looking for deficiencies in the market, but if they're going to try to do something like wire transfer fraud or mail fraud, they know how to target new employees. So making sure everyone knows policies and procedures that can be as simple as who to notify, who to ask if something is a real email, who to ask if something, someone's asking you to, as simple as buy gift cards, which we hear this a lot. Someone's asking you to go buy $2,000, $2,100 gift cards and send them for an upcoming event somewhere. Who do you ask? Is this something that I really should do? Is this proper? And to have that policy enforced and part of an ongoing training. And then I've touched on this throughout because it is that important to have a true partnership with your IT consultant. And again, this goes, we work with a lot of small businesses and medium enterprises. And I talk to a lot of people that are moving up into that enterprise space that have in-house IT departments, and they still utilize IT consultants too. I mean, in fact, I'll tell you, the bigger the companies are, the more they understand the team approach in having third-party eyes on everything. So regardless of an internal process or procedure, to have that IT consultant who's an expert in the area, and again, forward-looking, because that's what they're doing. And we go to shows a lot. We see all of our partners throughout the country at different shows and learning about the latest cutting edge technologies, but also what threats to look out for and how to best prepare and protect our team, our clients in that regard. So this is components of a defensive strategy. Things that we want to look for are, I'm going to breeze through this slide because I'm running a little short on time here, but also because I've talked about the majority of the things on here. To address contingent business interruption, that last A, that's again what could happen to other people if your system is compromised. So important, and it's not usually included, especially if you're looking at a rider or something to a commercial policy. It's not going to be there. Pay on behalf versus reimbursement. This is again something we highlight in all of our policy comparisons. The majority of policies in the marketplace are by reimbursement, which means that if an incident were to occur and there's all these things, moving parts happening, you actually have to pay the bills up front, and then you will get reimbursed, but it can really be a burden to pay up front and then have to track another thing and try to get reimbursed for the money that's gone out the door. So we really look for policies that are called pay on behalf of, which means the bills go directly to the insurance company. You don't have to worry about it. So that's when we do these comparisons and we line policies up side by side. That's one of the key things we look for. Sublimits on a policy, that is so important. Again, in an area we will highlight for you, because there can be things that are a little bit tricky, nuances to these policies. And if it's not specifically listed on there, it's not covered. And there might be sub-limits on policies that mean if you have a large amount of coverage, say $2 million of coverage, there could be an area that's still limited to 100,000. So we will do the work of reading through all the pages of a policy and making sure everything is understood by all policies. And then to determine the appropriate amount of coverage, that is something, again, that is individualized, because a lot of what we look at is yearly and then dividing by 12 to get monthly revenue and saying, okay, if there is an incident, and knock on wood, hopefully it won't, but if you're slow or down for 6 weeks, what type of business interruption coverage are we looking at there? So these are things that are unfortunately not commonly known in the cyber insurance industry, and we always want to highlight when we have a chance to educate and talk like this, and also when we do policy comparisons, to make sure we're getting the best of the best for our team. And that brings us to where I'll wrap up the data stream difference and things that I've mentioned throughout here. But we have one application that is very simple and gives us access to over 20 specialty sources. So a simple process that allows us to go out to all of our partners on the back end and see what options are available so that we can then give you comparisons. And we'll typically do this in a good, better, best format. And the real goal is that you understand exactly what you're looking at. We can compare the different coverages and make sure that we have something that's completely comprehensive for you and you feel extremely comfortable with. To ensure we have free trainings like these tabletop exercises, access to incident response plans, so critical to what we do. And then where we come from is really from the side where we have access to a lot of data. So we're actually able to, on the back, our data science team working around the clock behind the scenes to make sure that we have this actual risk data that we can compile and use to guide our clients towards making the best choices for them. And then, of course, this fourth bullet point here, this is not something that we want to just have one conversation about. We want to work on an ongoing basis with our partners to make sure that we're planning for next year's renewal, for the year after, as you grow, as things change in your world, to make sure that in conjunction, with your ITC, that we're getting in place what we need to make sure that you're going to have a successful renewal. Because just like there are requirements to getting a policy, unfortunately, we're seeing some of the more traditional insurance companies not want to renew their cyber insurance policies. And we hear from a lot of people that are getting issued what's called a non-renewal, and then they're looking for a new insurance carrier. So that's why it's so important that we have all the sources we do. We'll always be able to find a great policy and a great recommendation for people. So that is the data stream difference, and where I'll pass it back to you, Rhonda, for any questions, and I'd love to give answers to any of those questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. I think you did a fantastic job.
Excellent.
Here I am. This took me a while to get back on camera. So I have a quick question for the audience. If you guys don't mind replying in the chat, how many of you have, a lot of you replied that you do have cyber insurance. A lot of you don't. But for those of you that do, have you had a challenge getting it renewed? To Joe's last point, getting the renewals. Because as technology updates are made, right, the standards are changing a little bit. And so I would be curious to know how many of you are having those challenges. But additionally, Joe, what are some of the key questions that when a company is working with you and your team on getting a cyber policy, what are some of the key questions that they ask that maybe about their policy, an existing policy, that they don't understand?
Sure. Yeah, no, great question. And to your earlier point there about trouble getting renewals, what we're also seeing in the marketplace is that some of the more traditional large insurance carriers, and these are typically going to be the insurance companies that are probably doing workers' comp insurance, commercial insurance for a company, and then in the past they've added on a cyber insurance policy. A lot of those companies are the ones that are sort of splitting off, and they're saying, hey, you know what, we don't really understand this cyber space like we understand workers' comp, and they're issuing non-renewals because they're deciding they don't want to be in the cyberspace.
Right.
So it's not entirely, it is definitely about controls and gauges, but some of the insurance companies are just not wanting to partake in cyber. And then we have on the other side of the spectrum, a whole bunch of specialty companies that we have access to that all they do is cyber insurance. So that's where we can really step in there and help people make those educated decisions for them to make sure they get reissued. And to answer your second question, the biggest questions that we get, or I would say the most important things we look at, touched on that last slide, but what's most important to me is pay on behalf versus reimbursement. Something that's kind of buried in the terminology a lot of the times, could be on the the 37th page of the policy. And that's something that until it's brought to light, people don't even know to look for it a lot of times. So a lot of the traditional insurance policies are reimbursement, whether they're for cyber or for other things. But so we can really look for and almost always find pay on behalf policies. So that is one key area that we see. And then the other key area that we always highlight is the difference between business interruption and contingent business interruption. So this is, again, that area where business interruption is what happens to you, to your business, if things are paused for a month, or if there's a data breach and client's information is exposed. But that contingent business interruption is, what if someone got into your system and they were able to get into one of your clients' system also, and there's a second data breach there? That is going to be that comprehensive coverage for what happens to other people that were exposed through your system.
That's really good. Thank you for clarifying that. I'm sure a lot of people have that question. So one of the things that I love about you, and I know I'm your peer, so I love this. I get the benefit of this, but you explain insurance in easy to understand marketing terms for me, right? Like, it's not technical, and you make it make sense. So my question is, I mean, do you, when we bind a policy for a business, do you actually walk through it with them? And tell me about that, what that procedure looks like.
Absolutely, throughout the process. But I'm so glad you asked that, because when we bind the policy, we actually have a process that's called an audit process. So we have a cyber audit that's after we bind the policy. And this actually is probably the most common question that I get, to your earlier point. The most common question we get from people we're talking to for the first time is, will the insurance policy pay out if there's an incident? And it kind of pains me that the insurance industry may have that reputation, but I guess it does, because I get asked a lot. They say, well, getting a cyber insurance policy sounds interesting, but will it actually pay out when there is an incident? And the answer is yes, it will. But we want to make it as easy as possible for all parties. So we will do, at first, a policy comparison. If someone has an existing policy versus the policies that we're finding through our sources, we'll look at them and do an apples to apples comparison. And then when someone picks a policy, we will walk through it with them, of course, but also with their ITC, with their IT consultant company. We'll do an audit process, which is very easy, but we're just uploading proof of all the answers in the application to an online document, to a cloud document. It's something that is an extra service, it's free of charge, and it just puts us in a really good position that if there ever is an incident and we want things to happen very expeditiously, we point back and say, hey, look, here's the audit process when we bound the policy. All the information's there, and it just makes it a lot easier for everyone who, insurance, even though it's cyber insurance, it's still insurance. So there's boxes to check, and we want to make sure that those boxes get checked as quickly as possible for our clients.
That's great. So what I heard you say is that this audit report is not to be scary, because when we hear the word audit, like, immediately, we get panic attacks. But it's really something we do proactively that not all cyber insurance coverage carriers, brokers would be doing, right? It's over and above. And that's really just about, on the back end, when something happens, to make sure that, everything is documented, you do get paid. That's kind of interesting.
Absolutely. And yes, it's very straightforward. And we make every effort, right, that we want to be educating year round. But I am also aware that the majority of companies, they probably think of their insurance policies once a year when it's time to renew, right? So, and then you have your business to focus on, which you should. So one reason we provide so many opportunities to participate in events or for education, but also to do this audit, it's very easy. It just matches up with the questions on the application. And we do it at the time of bind so that it's done, it's there, and you don't have to worry about that. We just make sure that's done, and then you're set moving forward.
So, Joe, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on you there. There's an interesting discussion going on in chat. I just wanted to bring it to your attention. So,
great.
We've got a couple people that have asked about, can DataStream cover or offer policies that cover then MSP or an ITC? Short answer is yes, right?
Yes, great question.
Okay.
We absolutely do, and I would love to talk to anyone about that.
Okay.
And the policies are slightly different, because there would be cyber plus Tech E&O, which stands for Technology, Errors, and Omissions. They're combined into a policy. It's a very effective policy, and we'd love to help people with that. So it's something that, we go to conferences ourselves to find sources like for these things, and policies for ITCs are not the easiest, but we've developed actually over the last month a very straightforward process to have access to policies for ITCs for cyber plus tech E&O. So they're actually fantastic, and we have a really good process there.
Okay, so a couple follow-up questions to that. One, and I want you to be crystal clear about this, because I know the answer to this, but this is all you. A couple of them have said they're thinking downstream, like, do we have a group that will work with the ITC on and bring their customers a solution for insurance? Part two of that, I said the answer was yes, that's what we do. Part two of that, and this is where I need you to be crystal clear. They want to know if we can bring in a co-branded proposal.
So yes and yes.
Okay.
So yes, that's exactly what we do. That is the core of our business. Is we have a whole partner experience team that works with ITCs. That's what they do day in, day out to help them to educate their clients, to be a resource to them. So that is our core function. And then myself and our agency team, we are that resource that will get them specific policy information, do all the things we've talked through. So part one, absolutely. That is the core of what we do. We're there to partner with ITCs and to be that trusted resource for you and be a true partner to you. Second part, yes, we can do that. It's something we would just want to have an individual conversation about, but actually just recently came into that capability. So exciting that we can do that.
To co-brand the policies.
In terms of, yes, in terms of having, so the policies themselves. So when we talk about the ecosystem of insurance, the policies themselves, so that's like the last thing you get. That's from an actual insurance carrier. But in terms of if we want to co-brand an application that has a DataStream logo and your ITC logo on that, absolutely, we can do that. And so that is customer facing to your customers. So there'd be not just the DataStream logo on the application, but your company's, your ITC company's logo on there. Once they fill out the application, that's then going to allow us to go out to our specialty carriers. And when they ultimately decide on a policy, it would have the insurance backers logo on it. So a little bit different, but I think the question was more geared towards customer facing.
I think so as well.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to throw out there to any of the ITCs who are on the call, because this webinar was open to both IT consultants and their customers, right? So to make sure we're clear, we are happy to jump on a webinar with your partners. So if you wanted to invite your customers in to a webinar that you host, and we are just the subject matter expert about insurance, we can absolutely do that. We do that several times a week for partners. So we're happy to jump in and just kind of answer the questions that your customers might be having, because it does benefit you to ensure that your customers are covered by a cyber insurance policy. We have found, we've had several examples of an MSP or an ITC that has come to us and said, my customer got breached and they thought that because they pay me a monthly fee for monitoring that my insurance covered them. And so for many reasons, that just being one of them, it does behoove you as a consultant to make sure that your customers do have a good policy in place. So
I did see one more on there too. That's kind of funny because this is actually a running joke we have at DataStream too about the insurance carriers. So I would say, if we have, I think we're almost up to 30 sources. I would say, a smaller percentage of them understand the dynamic because although it is evolving quickly, the cyber insurance space, it's still insurance, and some companies still think it's 1950, and there's only what we can do about that. So we actually have some running jokes internally about that too. But that's one of the reasons that we insert ourselves into the equation, to be the ones that do understand that dynamic, and that we can, vet the whole process as we go through that insurance application to qualification to policy ecosystem, and be there to be that buffer for some of the ridiculousness that, yes, we see also.
Yes, I think it also helps. That's where the universal application comes in too, right? So you're not filling out like for those of you who have seen the applications, sometimes they're 7, 11 pages, sometimes they're 30. And I think Larry was saying that he saw one that was like 50 pages, and they can be a little stressful. So we have one application that we can, once we get the information, Joe and his team send it out to multiple carriers that they think are well suited. Can you talk a little bit about that real quickly, about how you choose which carriers to submit the applications to?
Yeah, absolutely. If we were to look at all of the carriers, they're kind of in a little bit like subsets or buckets, I would say. You've got on the far end of the spectrum, those more traditional insurance companies that I was referencing, that more specialized in like workers' comp, commercial general. They still do write cyber insurance. On the far other end of the spectrum, there are some newer companies that all they do is cyber insurance. So we have a full spectrum of options. Typically, what we look at, one of the things on the universal application just indicates an industry that a customer is in. So knowing the industry and their revenue size gives us a good idea that, hey, we're going to mainly focus on these 5 or 6 options over here, or maybe these 7 to 10 over here. So some of that is split by vertical, by industry vertical, and then some is split by revenue size. But yeah, so it is an interesting, and to be honest, it's a evolving marketplace where it is still so new in a lot of ways. It's in one of the challenges, honestly, is what we deal with is it's not standardized yet. Whereas if you were to look at auto insurance policies from 10 different auto insurers, they're pretty much all going to read the same. If we're to look at 10 different policies from 10 different cyber insurance companies, they're going to use different terminology in a lot of them. And so that's where I'm a little bit of a tangent there, but that's where it's like an evolving marketplace. And so we really have a highly trained team to navigate that and be able to make sure that, as you said, Ron, we try to make it understandable, but make sure that everything's accurate and that we're looking at specific things in each policy.
Yeah, I love that when we do quote policies, we do give comparative quotes in English, like everyday plain English. And also I've seen the matrix where you highlight, you say, these are the differences and this is why. Here's, for lack of better terms, good, better, best scenarios of quotes. Here's 3 viable quotes or more. These are the differences, and this is what I recommend, and here's why. Like, I've seen your emails on that. They're really succinct, super valuable. So I want to value everyone's time. We are at 4 minutes over, in fact. So thank you for the questions. Joe, thank you for being here. So everyone knows this webinar will be uploaded onto our partner platform. If you're not part of our channel partner program, I will send out an email afterwards that will give you access to that. Also, eventually we'll be building out a YouTube and it'll be there as well. So thank you so much for all of your attendance. Appreciate you being here. I hope you got something valuable out of it. Joe, as always, I love chatting with you. I learn something new every single conversation. So thank you just for being who you are.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks everyone for being here.
Thanks.